Good evening and welcome to the Museum of Contemporary Art, North Miami. My name is Lauren Backus and I serve as MOCA's Director of Education and Community Engagement. It's a pleasure to have you with us tonight for Conversations at MOCA. We're fortunate to be in conversation this evening with three remarkable thinkers and practitioners: artist Hiba Schahbaz, curator and cultural worker Jasmine Wahi, and writer and scholar Alpesh Patel. We bring this program to you through the generous support of the Knight Foundation and contributions from our members, and a special welcome to our MOCA members. Before we begin, let's take a moment to recognize the space and time in which we gather. It's our usual practice to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Seminole and Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida. We further acknowledge the Calusa, Jaega, Miami, and Tequesta, indigenous peoples who have cared for, stewarded, and shaped this place long before us, and whose descendants continue that stewardship today. At this moment in time, we also honor those who are here in this room, in this city, in this state, in this country. In this moment, the artists, the curators, the culture workers, the friends, the neighbors, the community members, all of whose presence is vital and whose lives are worthy of respect. To speak to the broader context in which we're gathering, with some institutions choosing to close in response to ongoing urgencies and calls for justice, MOCA has chosen to remain open this evening, and we do so with intention and care. Our mission has and continues to be to support artists and ideas that are often underrepresented, including the work of immigrants, diasporic communities, and those whose stories have historically been marginalized. Our orientation is towards humanity, always, towards creating spaces where complex, sometimes difficult conversations can unfold, and where people can encounter one another with curiosity and respect. Tonight's program centers on Hiba Schahbaz's exhibition, The Garden, which transforms the galleries into lush, expansive places of imagination, memory, and intimacy. In the garden, Hiba creates a world of tenderness, power, and vulnerability on one's own terms. Her large-scale works invite us into landscapes that are both deeply personal and profoundly shared, asking us to consider how we care for ourselves, each other, and the spaces we inhabit. As we move into tonight's discussion, I invite us all to hold that orientation in mind, to listen generously, to recognize the lived experiences held in the room, and to consider how the worlds we imagine in art can inform the worlds we build beyond these walls. And with that, thank you again for being here and sharing your evening with us. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Alpesh Patel, who will say a bit more about the framework. Thank you. For tonight's conversation, and introduce Hiba and Jasmine. And I am a full believer in giving people their flowers. So I'd like to take a moment and tell you a little bit about the bio that I have here. Alpesh Patel is an associate professor of global contemporary art at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University. His art historical scholarship, art criticism, curatorial projects, and teaching reflect his queer, anti-racist, and transcultural approach to contemporary art. He is an associate editor of visual arts, architecture, and art history for the Association for the Study of Arts at the Present Journal, and an editorial advisory committee member of the Getty Research Journal. Previously, he was chair at the editorial board of Art Journal and Art Journal Open, and an editor of contemporary art book reviews for CAA Reviews. He is the author of Multiple and One, Writing Queer Global Art Histories, forthcoming 2027. And Productive Failure, Writing Queer Transnational South Asian Art Histories, and editor of the anthologies Creole Archive, Jacek Kolinaski, forthcoming as well in 2027, and also Storytellers of Art History. He is co-editor of 3 special journal issues, What Can Trans Do?, Awuki Ezewor, and The Art of Curating, and Trans Asia, and editor of 5 exhibition catalogs published in conjunction with shows he organized at Miami Beach Urban Studios, FIU. As curator at large at Urban Glass in New York City, He organized a series of exhibitions in 2023 to 2024 under the theme Forever Becoming, Decolonization, Materiality, and Trans-Subjectivity. Other shows he has organized include British Arts Council, funded by Mixing It Up, Curry Mile and Currying Canal Street, which took place across 7 venues in Manchester, England. He spearheaded successful efforts for Ambas FIU to be designated as a City of Miami Beach cultural anchor in 2012, and as a result be eligible for annual cultural arts grants to support a range of programming, including a queer voices and social justice artist lecture series he organized. In addition, from 2017 to 2019, he served as chair of the Art in Public Spaces Committee of Miami Beach. His writing appears in scholarly journals, such as Art History, Pedagogy and Practice, and Philosophia, a journal of transcultural national feminism, as well as an exhibition catalog including The World That Belongs to Us. Excuse me, sorry. Ooh, sorry. He's also published over 70 short-form reviews and interviews in venues including Art Forum, Art in America, the Brooklyn Rail, Bomb, Hyperallergic, Freeze, and leading academic journals. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing all that. Thank you so much for allowing me to share so much of your work, and thank you for being here, and I'll pass it to you. Thank you, Alpesh.
Thank you so much, and I have the pleasure now of passing that generosity on to introduce our wonderful artist and curator of this exhibition. So to your left, all the way to my right, is Hiba Schahbaz, who lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. She trained in traditional Indo-Persian miniature painting at the National College of Arts in Lahore and received her MFA from Pratt Institute in New York. Since migrating to the US, Schahbaz has challenged the rigorous rules of miniature painting to embrace a female perspective, while also creating space and representation for identities often left out of Western art. Her practice has expanded from miniature to human-scale paintings that depicts female bodies while referencing self-portraiture. Her work has been included in group exhibitions at the Brooklyn Museum, Flag Art Foundation in New York, Santa Monica Art Museum, ICA Miami, and the Northern Illinois University Art Museum, among others. Her solo exhibitions include Summer of Dragons and Love Songs in London and Paris, respectively. And in 2021, she presented a public art commission at Rockefeller Center with Art Production Fund. Schahbaz has written about in White Wall, Art Forum, New York Mag, Forbes, The Huffington Post, Hyperallergic, Covetor, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Art Critical, amongst other publications. And she's been an artist resident at the Tang Museum, Mass MOCA, Stoneleaf Retreat, Wasaic Project, and the Vermont Studio Center. And she currently serves as a board member for the Art Production Fund. I know we're giggling up here, but we'll get through the introductions, I promise, then we'll, but this is important, right? Yes. All right, and to my immediate right, Jasmine Wahi is the founder and co-director of Project for Empty Space, a nonprofit organization in New York City and Newark, New Jersey. Her multifaceted curatorial practice predominantly focuses on issues of femme empowerment, complicating binary structures within social discourses, and exploring multi-positional cultural identities through the lens of intersectional feminism. In 2023, Ms. Wahi was honored by the Metropolitan Museum of Art for exemplary social impact works in the arts, both the Project for Empty Space and in her other roles as both a museum curator and independent practitioner. In 2020, Ms. Wahi became the inaugural Holly Block Social Justice Curator at the Bronx Museum of the Arts, while simultaneously co-directing Project for Empty Space. While at the museum, she created several renowned exhibitions, including Born in Flames, Feminist Futures, and War Dome Milan, America. God Bless You, If It's Good to You, which were oriented around the thesis that visibility is the primary tenet of social justice. Earlier in 2020, Ms. Wahi co-curated the ongoing traveling exhibition, Abortion is Normal, with a cohort of intergenerational cultural practitioners. including Rebecca Pauline Jempol, Marilyn Minter, Laurie Simmons, Gina Nani, and Sandy Tate. The exhibition will be revived and travel across the US in late 2023 and 24 ahead of the presidential election as a way to engage voters across the country. Okay, so this is a little, yes, okay, that's okay. In 2019, Ms. Wahi gave her first TED Talk on intersectionality and visibility entitled All the Women in Me Are Tired. A lover of learning and sharing, Ms. Wahi has taught at a number of art institutions, including Yale University and the School of Visual Arts, MFA Fine Arts Department. She's currently in the faculty of Brooklyn College in New York City. In addition to her faculty roles at academic institutions, Ms. Wahi also serves as both a faculty member at Art Forward and a board member at CCNY at Baxter Street. Ms. Wahi received her own art history education from NYU, where she has an MA from the Institute of Fine Arts and a BA in art history from the College of Arts and Sciences. Jasmine Wahi lives in Brooklyn, New York with her Chihuahua mutt, Momo. It's just incredible actually just reading your bios because I think that, you know, we tend to think of this portion of the evening as just an introduction, but these are incredible people that I'm with, and it's an honor to be up here with you. You know, I think I wanted to just get started by talking about how coming in here, you know, I'm thinking about what this day is representing at this current moment in this country, and I'm very thankful to spend this time with all of you, and I hope that you're all well, and that we're here together in this space, which I'm very excited about, and I think, you know, when coming into the space felt so warm and welcoming, despite that it's very cold and the air conditioning is kind of on the fritz, but nonetheless, my heart is warm being in this space. And I also feel like the figures behind me are going to protect me. If there's any ICE agents or anything else that sort of comes my way in this space, they're here to protect me. And it's just so wonderful to be not only hearing, you know, all of these words about both your accomplishments, but to see POCs taking up a lot of space, literally, in your work, Hiba. And maybe I wanted to start with that, to ask a little bit about your relationship to scale. Thinking about, you know, going back to miniature painting, to what you're doing now. So it's really open-ended question, but if you could speak to scale.
Yes.
Oh, Hiba told me before if I asked her a yes or no question that she would answer it yes or no, and that would be it. And of course, what do I do? The first question I ask is yes or no. All right, so beyond, now that you've answered yes or no, elaborate and tell us more about scale in relationship to your work.
So I trained as a miniature painter in Lahore in Pakistan. I wasn't born there. I was born in Karachi. And for the first part of my career, you could call it, and also my academic life, I was studying this very old traditional form of painting. And miniature paintings are often small in scale, but they're also extremely detailed and stylized and luminescent, and I love miniatures, so I painted miniatures for a really long time. And I would say around about 10 years ago, and the reason I know this is because we've all been posting photos from 2016. My paintings started expanding in scale to the works that you can actually see behind you, which were painted on this earth-stained paper from India. And that sort of was my introduction into larger scale artwork. And I began joining these papers together to create these human-sized paintings. And so now I'm kind of in the middle Like I paint really large paintings, and I still paint a lot of miniatures. Why not?
I asked her why she painted them large.
I think when I was a miniaturist, I felt a lot of I felt like I had to maintain and also carry on a tradition, because it was a form of, like, a dying art form almost. And and naturally I did paint really small even as a kid. But in my mind, I started seeing the figures as larger many years before I actually started painting large figures, but I was kind of afraid to take that step, and eventually I took it.
I'm glad you asked that why, to further elaborate on that question. And Jasmine, like, from the point of view of a curator, I was really interested in reading in the text that, you make it very clear that the artworks and your curatorial vision are sort of coming together in an interesting way, but the works weren't made necessarily for the space. And I was wondering if you could, tell us a bit more about your vision and the garden.
Sure. So I think for me as a curator, I look as curatorial practice not as a hierarchical endeavor. I consider it always to be a collaborative endeavor. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the way I'm thinking about the work or interpreting the work or feeling about it is always going to come through, nor does it mean necessarily that everything that the artist is thinking of in sort of like an internal monologue is going to come through in something that is presented to a public that is made up of many different communities. So in that, I like to think about how I think about the work through the lens, through, I guess, sort of a traditional art historical lens, interpret that how you will, to how other people might interpret it, to sort of the emotional response that I can sort of anticipate people having, and try and marry that with where the artist is coming from. But in this case, Hiba and I have had such a long relationship with each other that actually is almost the exact length of the amount of time that this show covers, that I think in many ways the collaboration and sort of our shared cultural histories and our friendship came together in a way where, having watched her work change and develop over such a long period of time, there were certain things that really stuck out to me as common threads, in the same way I think that a lot of curators would, when thinking about a group show, pull either visual cues or ideas out. And as I did that, I also knew that, like, the idea of a garden is not the central point of why Hiba is making work, or the work that she's making, particularly over such a long time. So I think the role of the curator, in as much as I'm creating something to present to a public, is to think about ways that it's digestible but not reduced. And again, because of our shared histories and backgrounds, I thought of the things that jump out at me are often environmental, as far as atmospheric, so elements, I guess. And so Hiba and Lauren and everyone has heard me say this a million times, but I started thinking about elements in terms of fire, wind, water. Now it sounds like Captain Planet, earth. And because there were those four, I thought about also, we have a shared interest in Urdu poetry. And I guess sort of now an esoteric interest, but one nonetheless that is important, and Urdu culture or Islamic culture from the subcontinent. And one of the things that is shared within that, and also a commonality in miniature practice historically, is the char-bagh, or the four-part garden, or the paradise garden, which is, of course, common amongst many spiritual practices. But thinking about that background, thinking about the images and the language that Hiba has created, and we discussed it and sort of came to this idea that that could be a framing, but making sure that in the public framing of that, it was understood that the artist intention isn't to do that, because I think it's very important to clarify between what a show is and when you're, especially in a circumstance of looking at a long history of an artist's work, understanding that there's more to that work than is in the show, and there's more nuance in what's being presented than what is being presented on the surface. Does that answer your question? That's sort of a long-winded answer.
No, that was great. I really wanted you to give us that positioning of the space that we're in and doing this talk. So that was really helpful. And also it was really interesting to hear from you that this show is a 15-year retrospective, but it's also then a retrospective of your friendship that you've been together for 15 years, which is amazing. And I guess, on that point, I'm really curious if both of you could talk a little bit about care, self-care, and also care for others in relationship to your curatorial practice and your artistic practice, because I see
first.
both of those things coming out.
The short one has to go first.
I've forgotten the question.
So it was about thinking about self-care and care for others that I believe comes through in your artistic practice, and as well as Jasmine's curatorial practice. But you're doing a lot of care of your own body in the work, but I think it's also about you're projecting and thinking about caring for others too. And so just thinking about that duality, if you could talk a bit more about that. No, you can't say no. You have to answer the question or attempt. Talk out loud.
So I've never really thought of it like that or heard it framed like that. So that's interesting. And I also have no idea how to answer it, but I'm going to try. I think the body is very important to me, and it's something that I've always painted. And for me personally, self-care is learned a little bit, although I think that's kind of a cultural female South Asian upbringing thing, that self-care is learned, but caring for others comes very naturally. But it's not, neither are things that I do or don't do consciously. I think they're just sort of the fabric of who I am as a person, and even as an artist. My studio has always been very open to women who want to visit. There have been a lot of stories told in that space, and sometimes it feels like they're all sort of, over time, something that was about me now has a lot more woven into it. And in a way, I feel like Jasmine is, I'm just going to answer for her since I have the mic, is much more intentional about the way she cares for others. And now you can answer the rest of that.
Well, I think with regard to you, I don't think you give yourself enough credit, but that's a different South Asian mom conversation. So I think, and I don't know if you would categorize yourself as a feminist necessarily in the same way that I am often sort of just blathering on about what feminism is, but I think in your work, there is an innate quality about it of care that may not be at the forefront of your consciousness, but that creates a space for women in general, but particularly women who look like us, to be seen. And even though you are making, the work is generated from the self, visibility means something, and I think very vulnerable visibility, whether it's vulnerability in the sense of nudity or the body, or simply, in the case of the show, being with oneself either in an environmental space or over and over again, creates, I think, a type of vulnerability that is very relatable. And through that, there is this innate care, almost in the same way when I think about the way that, like, my nani, which is my mother's mother, was a feminist, even though that wasn't part of her lexicon necessarily, but in everything she did, in the way that she, maybe not was super fuzzy and cuddly, but through cooking, through teaching classes, through her own sort of informal artistic practice that was encouraged amongst her children and grandchildren, there's something that was a way to create a seeingness or being seen for other people. So I think that is part of your work that maybe goes unacknowledged in your own head, so I'm going to impose it on you. And I think...
That's why we have curators.
True, very true. I think for myself, I think care is a very important and intentional part of my practice, because in part, one form of care, I think, is also creating visibility through curating, not necessarily through making work. But also, I think we live in an inherently violent world, and the degrees of violence are relative and different for each one of us. But I think as time goes on in my life, whether it's my own level of consciousness or it is in fact the world around us, but it seems to be metastasizing in a way, these types of violences. And so the only thing I know how to do best to sort of keep myself sane is to use sort of my skills in, whether it's writing or curating or just gathering people, as a way to combat that. And so it's something I think about a lot, particularly when making shows, which is why I work with certain artists like Hiba to sort of create those spaces that are, I think, for us sort of selfishly, but also for our communities who may in fact be strangers, but we have a kinship with.
Yeah, I guess to that point, I was thinking a lot about, I briefly mentioned this in our Zoom conversation, but just having lived in Miami for 10 years and, having brown skin, it felt so different being in Miami than in where I currently live in Philadelphia. And I just thought this show is like a wonderful gift for the community, to be able to come in and see brown bodies, and to be able to revel in that. So that I think I was just interested in talking a little bit about this show here in South Florida. And if you guys can talk about, you've had a little bit of time now to reflect on the show being here, what that brings to your mind. Yeah.
I suppose from the artist's point of view, it's been really rewarding having a lot of people come in who can relate to the figures or who feel a certain kinship or connection with the female bodies, and hearing from them, or someone bringing their kids in, and things like that. So for me, it's been lower, higher. For me, I think the emotional aspect of it has been very nourishing, and it has led to many conversations around the body and how people feel seen and what makes them feel safe. And I'm sort of grateful that that's something we could achieve in this space.
I have another long-winded answer. It's a two-parter. So, prefacing, you're ready. So I think the first thing that is acutely on my mind, which we have already acknowledged, Lauren acknowledged it, you mentioned it, that we're in a very particular moment today, and just in sort of a ramp-up moment that is very anti-migrant, anti-immigrant. And I think, you mentioned I was the Holly Block social justice curator, and the thoughts that I have then have really evolved since then about what it means to be visible. But I think in this particular moment right now, in a time when people are forced to self-invisibilize or go behind the scenes or underground to avoid persecution, it means something to have artwork like this function as a, what is the word? As a stand-in for when we in our bodies can't be embodied necessarily in a place. It means something to have these figures on walls, hyper visible, in a way as a proxy, when perhaps we can't all be out in space for fear of that persecution, which is very real. And so I think that this is a particular reality in big cities, and in many states, like in Florida, like in South Florida, like in Minneapolis, it's basically everywhere. And so I think on one level that's very important and timely on a broader scale. And then the sort of second part to that is, I think, when we were thinking about this show, and again the idea of the garden particularly, I thought about the transcultural or transgeographical natures of care in the global south, across the global south, care for flora and fauna, and climate, and the ways in which the climate here, and again, this is sort of a very sort of personal way of looking at the show, but the climate here in South Florida is very similar to the climate that my parents came from, or my grandparents came from. My parents now live here in South Florida, and I think the greatest joy of my mom's life is that she can grow mangoes, which is something she couldn't do. And so I think there's a gardening culture and a level of care and so many parallels that made it feel like a homecoming in some ways. Even though I didn't grow up here, there's so many cultural similarities that I thought it was important to address.
Oh, that was really wonderful to hear that, and to again to think about this exhibition.
The mangoes are being eaten by the iguanas, but that's a different story.
Oh. Well, I'm glad actually you brought up the transcultural, the transgeographic, because I've been thinking a lot about just the prefix trans, and this is where I'm going to get a little conceptual or academic, but hopefully in a fun way, like if I can. But that prefix, when it's added to a word, it really destabilizes it. It makes, I like to say, it makes the word vibrate in some way, and keeps it unsettled. And I see that might be one way to think about many aspects of the show, not just transculturality, but also the transhuman. I'm really interested, Hiba, and you're talking a bit more about animals and the earth and roots and plants that are really interconnected to the bodies on display. They are they feel part of the body. They don't feel separate from it. And so I'd love for you to talk about that idea of the transhuman, moving away maybe from even talking about the feminine body, but the transhuman body. Yeah.
So I feel like I kind of see the world a little bit like that, as in I feel like everything is connected, people, nature, and I think in some ways it feels like separation is a very man-made concept full of suffering. So in my paintings, often there's a lot of connection, like women will connect with the earth or be more grounded or be a part of water, and animals and figures will be connected. And so I think I feel like there's a spirit that runs through all things, maybe even like a rock, and that sort of transcends gender in some way. Like gender is a very, I think in today's world, gender is a more fluid concept, which is great, because even that sort of separation has caused so much angst in the world in general. So a part of me optimistically feels like I know this is probably, especially with what's going on in the world, feels like very optimistic, but a part of me feels like we are on our way to transcend we're transcending a lot of barriers, not just geographical, but otherwise. And I know it doesn't really feel like it, but there are so many more ways in which we are more connected than we were. So yeah, I don't know, did that make sense? Okay.
It did, and I just think that that's an important point to bring out in your work, that it is so much about the planet and ecology, and there's and I think in your curatorial vision that kind of comes out as well. You mentioned the elements, and so that's definitely part of the vision in terms of spatially what you've done. I'm wondering if you would agree with that, and if you would want to elaborate more on that.
Yeah, I think it does. I think considering the elements in one way is considering the elements for themselves, but I think also can function as a metaphor for this idea of transformation. And I also think what you were mentioning about transhumanists is really interesting, because I hadn't actually thought about the works that way either, but it really makes sense, actually. And the reason I'm sort of still thinking about it is because often when I think about transhumanness, I think about, or I think the more colloquial way about talking about it is thinking about technology and humanity, and very rarely do we think about the morphing of human and animal, for example, like a sphinx or a mermaid, or we tend to sort of dismiss those as sort of fable or mythology that is fantastical. But I think what Hiba's hitting on is actually a very important reconnection with the organic and the possibility of transcendence through that. And so I think it's a really important framing. Thank you for bringing it up. I don't actually know if I answered your question.
No, you did. No, you did, and I'm glad it landed well, because I wasn't sure exactly where I was going with it myself, but I really felt like you would complete my.
I think it's really important because we are in a time, like amongst all of the other shit that's going on, like we're in an AI moment or accelerated AI moment, and I think we tend to think so, again, with like this level of acceleration towards how we can change ourselves, how we can be morphic or keep up with technology without sort of like actually acknowledging the other possibilities or realities that could get us to perhaps like a less violent or chaotic place.
And you mentioned just, the mango earlier as well. Again, like the connection to a plant is just so sweet, actually, as well. Like,
So sad. So sad the iguana's here. Not our friends.
I want to make sure, like, how am I doing? Okay, I have 10 minutes, or I need to wrap it up. Like, no, okay, all right, okay. I'm like, which way am I going? All right, we have some time. I wanted to talk about this word that I thought of when I first saw your work, and I mentioned this in the Zoom call, and the minute I thought of it, I got embarrassed because this is just the way that I've been conditioned to think about this term, and it needs to be recovered, I think is where I'm going with this. But I thought of beauty. And just to give an example of why this shame is attached to it is when I'm in an artist studio, and sometimes you'll just see a work and you want to say, oh, this is so beautiful, but there's so much baggage around the idea of beauty, and historically where that's coming from the West, the cisgender male sort of view of it. It doesn't have to be that though, right? Of course. So I'm thinking, okay, we could talk about this in a different way. So I'm really interested in maybe hearing your ideas of beauty from your perspective, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any of that baggage because I was born in the East.
So glad someone doesn't. I'm so glad.
I think being like one of the perks of being a South Asian woman, being born in the East, is that you don't have a lot of privileges, but beauty is your privilege, and you're encouraged to make everything more beautiful, whether it's life or your home or the garden or things like that. But beyond just the visual, I think beauty is more of something that is felt. It's meant to elevate the human experience, and anything which elevates the human experience is a good thing. So when we were discussing about discussing the show curatorially and the space, one thing that I did really want was to make the show beautiful. And I know this is probably not a popular thing to say, I want my show to be so beautiful. But what I meant was when people walk in, and there goes my street cred.
What street cred, dude?
So when people walk in, I want them to, especially because the show is during Art Basel, I want them to be able to pause and to be transported outside of what they have to do or the mundane, or even out of their heads, because personally I love it when something can just take me out of my own headspace and give me a different experience. So for me, beauty is more about that. And then if we sort of go into, like, there's so much poetry on the walls and in the text, and I feel like beauty is really important as well in like Sufism and spirituality, which sort of runs like a thread across a lot of Eastern cultures, whether it's painting or culture or literature or music. And it is kind of ingrained in us to walk into a studio and be like, oh my God, that's so beautiful. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I think similar to what Hiba is saying as far as background, I think it is something to be proud of, or it's something I am proud of coming from a culture that really values aesthetic beauty. And I think as someone who, in my sort of younger curatorial days, admittedly did show quite a bit of work that I would now consider to be verging on trauma porn, or work that was really strayed away from this idea of beauty. I've come to a point where I realize that our fear of this idea of aesthetic pleasure really is rooted in Western postmodernism. And, I can expound on theories on why I think that are really not super relevant. But I guess the point is, in my attempt to think about the ways in which we not only decolonize, but think about different modalities of seeing and other art histories outside of the one that I was trained in, we can actually hold space for things that are both beautiful and complex at the same time. We don't have to choose between like the painting of flowers that is simply just a painting of flowers and something that is like this, that holds a lot of meaning beyond the surface.
This is really great to the two of you talk about this term because, yeah, I think it's going to take a long time for that to
Ask me about religion. No, don't.
Well, that was not my question. Yeah, maybe spirituality would have been of interest, but maybe not religion per se. Well, I think the next question I want to ask is just thinking about, your next step in your artistic practice, curatorial practice. What can we look forward to? What are you up to in your studio? What are you up to?
Are you going to take a nap and rest? Is the question.
I'll rest when I'm dead.
I like to tell my students when I give them like 300 pages of reading to look at. It was like, there's time for that later to rest. For now, just read, please.
I kind of don't love having a plan. I feel like when you have a show, something usually shifts, and I have no idea what that is. I have some ideas, but I have, they're too raw right now. And I'm planning on being at a residency in mid-Feb for a month to sort of flesh those out. And I think I kind of love what we created here, and that's really unusual for me to say when I have a show, because I'm always like, this is wrong, that is wrong, everything is wrong. But this space feels good to me, and I'm sort of, so I'm not like in a rush to do, like usually I go from a gallery show to another gallery show, so I kind of want to be able to sit with this for a little while and see what it brings. But there's no plan, because when there's a plan, like, I can fixate too much, and I want to be flexible with that.
For me, we have quite a bit of stuff happening at Project for Empty Space. We have, I'm trying to count in my head, and that's why I'm in art, because I can't count. We have, I think, 6 shows coming up this year that I'm very, very excited about. And I'm also doing a lot of thinking about a space, whether it's a physical space or some other form of space that holds conversations around first, second, and third generation diasporas from the Swana community. Because I think often our stories of sort of in-betweenness get lumped or get overlooked. And I think it's important to acknowledge those stories. So that's something I'm doing a lot of writing and thinking about. And yeah, that's what I'm working on in addition to making 6 shows. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe as a curator, you don't have and running a space, you have to have a plan of some kind for the upcoming future. So 6 shows is a lot, but I'm so glad that you're in the world doing the shows that you do, and I think many other people would say that as well.
What are you doing next?
Oh, maybe I'm gonna.
Besides writing several books and
Right,
teaching
no,
and-
I'm just finishing up this book called Multiple in One: Writing Queer Global Art Histories, and it includes the writing of a couple of artists in the audience, actually, Elizabeth Bow and Pepe Mar and some other Miami artists. The book is, in some ways, for me, having, I had to move out of Miami to then write a book that really is about Miami. In some ways, it's like my love letter to Miami. It begins and ends in Miami. So even though it's a global book, it's very much rooted in being here. So I'm sort of wrapping that up. But I think, like you, I know what you mean about plans. They never seem to work out. But I think sometimes that can be a good thing. Like it's through the practice of curating and doing that something kind of comes up. And I feel good in this space too. So I totally agree with you there. And maybe with that, I would want to open this up to the audience for questions.
Thank you all. I have a mic if anyone has questions and would like the support of a mic. Otherwise, you can have at it. I can bring the mic to you.
Okay. I had a question about the actual space build out for the show with these different rooms and the triangle entrances. Is there significance to the shape that you chose and the amount of rooms and the flow? I'd love to learn about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Flowers and acknowledgement to Matt Rosa, who is the really incredible exhibition designer, who is just like so brilliant and generous and really listened to everything that we talked about. I guess I'll share sort of my perspective. I thought it was really important to incorporate elements of Islamic architecture and do so in a way that didn't feel stereotypical or exotic. And one of the things that is common within miniature painting and Islamic architecture and Islamic mosaic is triangles and geometry. And I think Matt had already had this vision of triangles. And when I first saw it, I was like, I don't know, it's like it's too far of a leap. But then when I really saw it, it clicked. It's such a beautiful and I think eloquent nod to that style of architecture and visual culture that I think it just worked out really nicely. And then the way he decided to sort of make this graded opening was just, I think, a brilliant way to create these sight lines that draw you into the show. And then as far as the number of rooms, it is oriented more abstractly, but around this idea of a char-bagh, the paradise garden, which is typically a garden in 4 parts that are all equal 4 parts that are oriented around a center space. And so in this case, we have the number, but the orientation is slightly different.
I'm going to add to that and just say that Matt is a Virgo, which is why all the triangles line up exactly. And MOCA changes the layout of the galleries for every show. So I think one special thing that the museum does is every show is a different experience, and you don't ever feel like you're stepping into the same space twice. Of course, ours is the best, but that's besides the point.
I mean, I'm loud, so I was about to put my church voice on. Okay. You all don't have to say that y'all want to stay with us because of me. You don't have to say it out loud. We all know it's implied. But I would love for you all to speak to, real thugs, street cred. But I would love if you guys could speak to the poetry that's included in the curatorial text. I think it's one of my favorite parts of the show as a poet and as a writer, but it's something that the two of you share together, your love for Sufi poetry. So if you could just speak to why it was so important to include it in the curatorial text and an explanation about the work.
Yeah, if you want to read it, you can. I think it is, gosh, why did we include it? My first answer is because I'm just a weird nerd. I don't know. No, I think again, this is, I think, very specific to me as a curator. I'm really interested in ways of engaging with the work that are not just visual. And so whether that be sonic or in some cases through smell, or in this case through other disciplines being poetry. And we do have a shared interest in this poetry that is part of our shared heritage. And so it was just something that it seemed sort of like a natural thing to include, but the way that I started picking out the couplets, none of them are full poems, are all excerpts from smaller works, was really in thinking about Hiba's work, sort of holistically, the room that it was in, or sort of the environment that it was in, and then also making sure that there were elements that were subversive in this poetry, which subversion in many different contexts, but Urdu poetry has, like so many forms of poetry, has this uncanny ability to say one thing and be talking about something else. And I think in the things that we selected here, with the help of your husband, my parents, various other inputs, there are multiple levels of coded meaning in these particular couplets that we selected. And so in some cases, like the couplets in this room are from a Pakistani revolutionary feminist. And then versus the very first room, the work is from a well-known Urdu poet from the 19th century. And so they vary, but I think they each speak to a particular feeling also that we wanted people to get from the room, which is why we have both the transliteration as well as the translation.
So I would say that one thing that sort of feels special about, like Jasmine said, Urdu poetry is often, and poetry in general, is often not what it seems. Like there's always a dual meaning. And so what I kind of like about that is it's also connected to painting and miniature painting. Like you'll see these beautiful pages from the Badshahnama, which is the Book of Kings, and it'll be the most ornate, like jewel-like painting. And if you look really closely, it'll be a war scene with like bloody heads on the floor, and there's a fly in the blood, and the fly is so minuscule you need a magnifying glass to see it, but it looks, at first glance, it looks so beautiful. So for me, it kind of reminds me of that weirdness, that the fly in the blood reminds me of the fly in the blood. Also, there's something which I felt when I walked into the space and I read it, and I feel like other people who speak the language also felt it, is that we are so occasional, like when you're an immigrant, you are separated a little bit from your language, and language is very powerful. It's a primary way to communicate. There's a sort of a joy which comes with reading your language on a wall. It's like a sudden sense of familiarity and home that came for me, and I think other people who were able to read it, which is sort of special for me.
Any others? Any other burning questions? I think we've reached our time.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you, Hiba, Jasmine, Alpesh, so much for being here with us. For all of you, there's no one else I would rather spend today with in this moment. Thank you for being in this community here today. I just want one more time, if we could just give a hand to our panel, Hiba, Jasmine, and Alpesh. Thanks again for being here, and we will see you soon.